Hey everyone, this is another episode of Logos Soup. Today I'm here with Psychedelic Milk. Psychedelic Milk is one of the most popular content creators in the psychedelic meme community, and he's also a native to Hong Kong. And once the protests and the civil rights movement in Hong Kong really took off, he took on a new calling as a guerrilla journalist, fighting for the human rights of the people of Hong Kong.
Hey, how are
Psychedelic
you?
Milk. Do you want to just give a little introduction, say anything about yourself that I didn't cover, and then we could get into a few questions.
Yeah, so I used to run a podcast, Psychedelic Milk, and it was pretty good, man. I interviewed, I think, over 100 or 150 people about psychedelics and people's experiences and what they've learned. And obviously, I was really into psychedelics as well because, I've had my fair share of mushrooms and DMT and other psychedelic substances like that, and I took the interest to find out more about it through other people's experiences, and that was going really great, and that ended because I just kind of lost interest in it. I found the people just kind of repeating the answers that I got from the interviews and whatnot, so I kind of took my interest somewhere else, and I devoted my time to other projects, and I kind of left Psychedelic Milk on its own. However, I still had the meme page, which is the Psychedelic Milk on Instagram. So I kept writing memes. I kept, making comedy and fun stuff. It didn't really cost too much time, so I thought, why not? And I was getting a lot of likes, and that felt good. and and until last June, kind of when the protests first started, I didn't really have the humor inside of me anymore to write psychedelic memes, and I kind of used my platform on Instagram to promote and let people know about what's happening in Hong Kong. I didn't really do it too much initially because I was afraid of um, kind of the backlash by CCP, Chinese Communist Party, or the Hong Kong police, or if they'll find me and put me in my place. But as the movement got bigger and bigger, I was less and less afraid. So, that's kind of like what I do. What you see me doing now in public is that, I'm always online promoting about what's happening, or just letting people know about the events that are happening in Hong Kong, which is moving, quite fast. So it's hard to keep up. It's hard to know all the characters. It's almost like its own TV series by now. But my job is to try to educate, especially people in America, because that's my main audience of my page are Americans and some Europeans. Try to educate you guys about what's happening here, because you guys only get the news through, I don't know, maybe CNN or some other news outlets, but you guys don't really get it from people that are on the ground, such as myself. So I thought it would be quite valuable for me to share my experiences.
Thank you very much. And you coming on this podcast is means a lot to me, and I hope that we get to share a lot of really important information and really pertinent information to our listeners. So the first thing I think that we should go over is the 5 demands of the protest.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a bit?
Yeah, so five demands started after June 12th, which is our June 12th is kind of like our the day where everything started. We had a march on June 9th, 2019, where we had a million people took it to the streets to protest the extradition bill, which is basically a bill that would allow mainland China to extradite criminals or people in general to the mainland to be tried, to be jailed, or whatever they want to do with us, basically. I mean, once it goes north into China, the door is shut and it's very dark and nobody knows what's happening. So this law was being introduced, and they were going to have the second reading, which is the last reading. It's kind of like Congress, where you have a bill that gets passed, and it was going to be passed on June 12th. However, there was a protest on June 9th where 1 million people showed up peacefully. We marched from point A to point B, showing how frustrated we are with this bill and how the people aren't on the side of this bill. Just give some context. There are 7 million people in Hong Kong, and 1 million people showed up. So that's 1/7. That's a lot of people. And on June 12th, they decided to pass it anyways. And a lot of protesters surrounded the Legislative Council, which is kind of like Congress in the U.S., and to try to stop the reading. And that resulted in a lot of police brutality, tear gas, rubber bullets, people getting beat up by the police, etc. And keep in mind, these protests are very peaceful. I mean, on June 12th, there was nobody like throwing Molotov cocktails. There's nobody banging on glass and destroying cars and nothing like that. I mean, people were just outside, trying to raise awareness and tell the people that are inside the legislative council that you're not doing the right thing. And the police gave a lot of excessive force on the protesters, which were mainly students and young people, college kids, high school kids, and just the youth. So after that, people came up with the 5 demands, which the first one is the complete withdrawal of the extradition bill, which was passed at that point, but we want it to be withdrawn, right? The second one was the release of the protesters without any charges. So drop all the charges of the protesters that were arrested on that day. And that was still early on. And now this second demand extends to all the protesters that has been arrested, there's been 9,000 by now. It's been a year since the protest happened, and there's been 9,000 arrested so far. So the second demand is we want those 9,000 to be released. And we realize this is a really hard demand to achieve because some has already been jailed, but anything is possible. And the third one is the withdrawal of the characterization of the riot term of the June 12 protest. So June 12 was a really peaceful protest. Everything pretty much was instigated by the police, and instead of calling it a peaceful protest, they called everybody a rioter that was even in the area. And that could be no farther from, I mean, that's complete BS, because if you look at the videotapes and the media coverage of June 12 protests, it's completely peaceful. There was zero rioting, but that's the label that they're trying to give us, to make themselves feel better, to have the judges give us, the max penalty that they can. So that's the third demand, to recall or withdraw the riot term used on the June 12 protests. The fourth one is just forming an independent investigation on police brutality, which is not very hard at all to do. There has been many instances of police injustice and police collusion with the triads, police collusion with the CCP, and I mean, if you go on Google and type in police brutality in Hong Kong, you'll find endless pictures and cases. There's actually a site dedicated to police brutality documentation in Hong Kong, and every day something new adds to the list. It's basically a Google Doc format, and there are the dates. There are these police officers doing certain things. However, the police officer the name is not listed because they don't have they have taken off their ID numbers on their uniforms for personal protection purposes because everybody hates them. And so that's the fourth one. Just investigate the police independently. And the last one is just the implementation of universal suffrage. So when Hong Kong was given over by Britain to China, they promised us that we would have fair elections. We would elect our representatives, but that's not the case right now. We can only elect certain people in the legislative council. And when I say that, there are a lot of limitations to that as well. Like when we want to elect somebody that's really pro-democracy, they will find a reason to disqualify that person before that person even runs. So it's like they have a goalkeeper, and they kind of let you choose who you want to choose to a certain extent. If that person is really annoying Beijing or is really doing too much in the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, that person would be disqualified. So we don't really have a true democracy in Hong Kong. We don't have free elections whatsoever. Our representatives are chosen by Beijing 100%. And so that's the fifth demand, is that we want to have this universal suffrage. We want to pick our own leaders, our own politicians, the people that represent us the best, but we can't do that. So I think that's the most important demand, is to be able to pick our own leaders, and the leaders will act accordingly, because now the leaders are just acting in accordance to Beijing. They don't listen to the people at all. If we have elected leaders in Hong Kong, like this whole protest, this whole debacle wouldn't have happened, because they would listen to the people instead of their bosses in Beijing. So that's the 5 demands.
Thank you for explaining that. So right now, what's the current status of these 5 demands in the extradition bill?
So the extradition bill has been withdrawn. I think it was somewhere around July or August. I'm not sure. So we have Carrie Lam, who is our chief executive. She's basically like a governor of Hong Kong. And we wanted this thing to be withdrawn. We marched the streets on June 16th again, peaceful protests. And that time we had 2 million people just pushing for the withdrawal of this bill. So every time it gets more and more people. And after that day, she had a press conference, and she basically withdrew the bill without withdrawing the bill. And and what I mean by that is that she said the bill hasn't been signed yet, or something. Like, I forget exactly like what she said. She used some Chinese idiom to describe how the bill wasn't going to be passed, but in law it was still going to be passed. So I don't know, like she was trying to do some wordplay or something like that. She was basically insisting that, oh, don't worry, this bill wouldn't be passed. It still has to go through some other processes, and in fact, it would be passed if she didn't stop it right away. And it took about a month and a half later for the bill to be completely withdraw. So, but now we're facing other bills. Now we're facing the national security law, which is an even crazier bill than than the extradition bill. That bill has just been introduced, and actually has been passed already last week by Beijing. So when it comes to these 5 demands, like we've achieved one, but we got a even worse one just last week. So did we really achieve anything in terms of these demands? I can say no, we didn't. But it doesn't mean that we didn't achieve anything at all. We achieved a lot, just not on these demands.
So this new bill, it was passed Sunday, if I followed your Instagram story correctly.
It was passed last Thursday, actually, and
Okay.
it was passed in Beijing. Basically, there's like a loophole in our system that lets Beijing decide that this could be decided in Beijing and not in Hong Kong. And this bill basically is a extradition bill 2.0, except they're gonna have offices. I mean, just put it this way. Imagine there are CIA offices like in your local town. That's what's gonna happen, but with Chinese Communist Party. And they can take you to China and they can jail you in China. They can try you in China without any question, without anybody even knowing. So it's like the extradition bill on steroids. And they're basically going to use this to arrest every protester, every person that speaks out for pro democracy, or every person that speaks out against China in Hong Kong, even if you're not from Hong Kong. Like there was a Australian graphic designer that was imprisoned recently for being part of the protests, and she's as white as it gets. So it doesn't matter if you're Chinese or if you're a foreigner, if you're in Hong Kong or in China talking bad about China or being involved in these movements, like you will be in hot water. And before there was a system to protect you against that, you would be tried in Hong Kong in fair courts. But now, even in Hong Kong, the courts are all bought out by Beijing, and you'll see a lot of unfair punishment on protesters, like we've been seeing now. And once the national security law passes through in Hong Kong, it passed in Beijing, but they're still filling out the details. So the official date won't be until probably somewhere around August. But once that's 100% implemented, they will pull the trigger on Hong Kong, and it's not going to be pretty. Like you think Hong Kong, it's been crazy the past year. It's going to get way uglier in the near future.
So recently, in light of what's going on and what they passed in Beijing, the White House released a statement saying that given this bill, the United States can no longer recognize Hong Kong as sovereign from China. And from what I understand, that that statement wasn't saying, um, we're not. The statement was saying that Beijing is conducting a horrible civil rights violation by basically taking over a sovereign state. Um, so then there comes the question of the United States and China and this very complicated relationship we have. Um, I have a few thoughts I want to share and run by you, but do you have any initial thoughts regarding the relationship between the US and China?
Well, first of all, I want to correct you by saying that I don't think this is a civil rights issue in Hong Kong, but it's more like an invasion in Hong Kong. I think civil rights, it's like what's happening in the U.S. now with, police brutality or racism and things like that. However, in Hong Kong, it's more of the police acts as a military for China, and they are trying to search and destroy every person that's anti-China or even is skeptical about China. So it's beyond a civil rights issue. It's more of a Nazi and Jew relationship where they want to round everybody up. I mean, they've been doing that already,
Hmm.
and and so it's beyond civil rights. This is an invasion. This is like a Holocaust, really. So yeah.
I think that's a good and important distinction you just made. So then, keeping that in mind, what would you say is this relationship between China and the United States?
Well, before this happened, China and the U.S. had a quote unquote friendly relationship on the surface. At least on the U.S. side, it was friendly from the Chinese side, they wanted to keep it friendly for the sake of business, but behind closed doors, they hated America. I mean, America's enemy number one in China's eyes. Uh, I think with the Western world, their perspective is always that maybe when China joins the global stage, like when they joined the WHO or other world organizations, that they would have a reform, so that they wouldn't be so authoritarian, so totalitarian, and they would come to terms with the Western world and adopt Western values. And I think previous presidents like Obama or Bush or Clinton, they all had that train of thought, and I don't blame them, because that's kind of the rational, what the rational person would think. I mean, they wouldn't think that once China gets rich, they would still behave the same way they do now. But as we can see, it's not really true. They're not just not they're actually amping up their human rights violations and everything else as they get more and more money, as they go into the world stage. And that has been the Chinese plan all along. The Chinese plan all along is to join world organizations, to play ball with world policies up to a certain point, and to pretend to be a friend. And when it gets all the power, when it gets more friends than you, they'll turn their back on you. They'll be the same way they were 20 years ago or 30 years ago when Tiananmen Square happened. Like, they don't give a shit. Like, they really don't. So in terms of Chinese and American relationship, now the masks are off. They can go to war openly on Twitter now. and I think it's a good thing, because nobody's lying now. You know, I think before, China was being very dishonest about their relationship with the West. What they wanted was their technology, their money, their funding. They wanted to bribe everybody on Wall Street or in Silicon Valley to give them money and incentives to give Chinese more technology and have more friends in America, so that when things happen, these people would not be on the side of the U.S. for monetary interest. And now, the masks are off, and everybody knows their role. Like, I think most people in America know what China is about now. And I believe it's a good thing for Hong Kong, because if they kept this act and this charade on, it would just be really bad news for Hong Kong, because they would keep doing business and they would pretend like nothing's happening, but they would keep suppressing our voices in Hong Kong. And the West wouldn't do anything about it, because they have a lot of interest staked in China. But now that China or U.S. companies are moving out of China, then it's when the West can really help Hong Kong and to raise support for Hong Kong, because now there's nothing to lose. Now there's no interest in China. So I believe it's a really good thing for us and the world just to know where everybody stands, because before we had this acting game where, oh, they're gonna be nice to us when they get richer. Don't worry, like they might be bad before, but they're good now. But I think everybody now realizes that won't happen. So what's going to happen next, nobody knows, but at least now the cards are on the table. Like, everybody knows who's who, and I think it's a good thing.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that this the recent events kind of forced the illusion of Chinese American friendship to be going away.
Exactly. Yeah.
And we were also talking about the problem of technology. And I think that the problem of technology in the United States and China is that's really one of two broad topics I want to talk about today, is technology and then police. But the technological relationship between China and the United States is very concerning to me. I just graduated from a technology university in New Jersey, and it was very disturbing to me how many how our university had such explicit and direct relationships with Chinese universities in Beijing. They even I was even sent on a trip to Beijing to Tsinghua University.
Oh wow.
Um, and that was, I it was always a dream of mine to go to China. I've always been very interested in the Chinese culture and that part of the world. So going there was very exciting to me, and I couldn't help but feel this strange. Well, one of the most immediate things I noticed was that there were truly police everywhere. You couldn't go anywhere without
Yeah.
being surrounded by police. Um, so that was one thing, but then the other was um, the very strange relationship that the Chinese university had towards patents and intellectual property. So, in order for me to have gone to China, I had to win a competition. It was an engineering competition. And the first round of the engineering competition was in Seattle, Washington. And my team performed very well, and we didn't talk about patents at all. And we got first place at that competition, and then we went to China. Every one of the Chinese teams had between 1 and 5 patents. I don't think there was a single Chinese team that didn't have patents on their technology. So overall, what I'm getting at is this very interesting technological war between the United States and China, and the fact that American universities seem to have this unapologetic relationship with China where we're freely exchanging technology back and forth. So that's kind of part one of my comments about technology. Part two would be the more like philosophical and um, concerning part of it, and it's that we're eventually going to reach points in technology where the United States ethically does not want to go. Um, we don't want to be, the majority of people in America are even um, uncomfortable with fetal stem cell research. Um, and we're extremely uncomfortable with the idea of genetic engineering on humans. There's a big debate, and I'm sure we're going to accept certain genetic engineering for abolishing certain diseases. But then there's the question of increasing intelligence, increasing physical capability. And the big concern that I think about is if the United States says that, say, certain kinds of genetic engineering are unacceptable, or brain computer interface is unacceptable, where a human would basically be able to directly interface with an artificial intelligence through a chip in their brain. And this technology isn't far off. Elon Musk's company Neuralink will be testing brain computer interfaces this year. They've already tested on animals. So overall, my point is that I fear that the United States is going to set certain ethical boundaries, which I think is very important. And I feel that there's no reason to think that the Chinese Communist Party will accept those ethical boundaries. So China will continue developing these technologies, and the United States will either be forced to choose to fall behind or to sacrifice those ethics in order to compete with the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah. I think Americans are quite naive when it comes to the fight with CCP. Um, a lot of Americans, all they care about is, I think they care about ethics when it comes to battling a demon, and I don't think that should be priority. When you're going into battle with some organization or a country that's as evil as the CCP, you should give it all you got, and you shouldn't worry about if this is ethical or that's ethical, or if this is. I think they should toss that kind of out the window for now because there's a bigger enemy at play. Um, I think the intentions of Americans are generally good. People in America have big hearts and they want to do the right thing. But when America has so much infighting about these issues, like is this ethical, is this right, is this or that, the enemy is already developing way ahead of you, and they're not thinking about those terms. So I think it's good that America thinks that way, but I think it's better for them to step out of their own little bubble and realize what your enemies are doing, and you have to be faster than them. Doesn't mean that you have to be as unethical as them, but you at least you have those technologies to counter what they're gonna do. Does that make any sense? Like
It does make sense.
like I
And
what I see from America is that there's a lot of debate and fight about things that you guys are doing to each other. Whereas I think this is just a I think that's a game of checkers where if you look at the international level, people are playing chess. You know what I mean? Like I think there's a lot of like look at the events that are happening now in the United States with the protests and everything else going on. I think that's mainly a domestic issue, and America is of course concentrated on that for the time being. But that's checkers. But CCP now is gearing up to fight you guys, to fight America, and that's a game of chess. So you guys are stuck on checkers level. Meanwhile, the world is playing chess. You know what I mean? Like it's I feel like America is already a very lucky place, and you guys got to where you are with the ethics and morality that you guys carry, but you're dealing with a whole different animal, and that animal doesn't think the way you guys think. It only thinks of how to destroy you guys. It doesn't care about morals or ethics or anything like that. You know what I mean?
yes, I do. So what you're saying to me, it makes a lot of sense, and it's a perspective that I don't think many Americans have. I think you're right in thinking, well, if we're just more ethical and more good, we'll win.
It's
My
not the case at
concern,
all. Yeah, it's not the case at all. I mean, you can have the technology and not use it.
mhm,
But it doesn't mean that you'll be just as immoral or unethical as China, but at least you have the defense against it.
right, right. So my concern is that so during the Cold War, the generally accepted narrative of the Cold War was that we had this nuclear arms race, and the United States and the Soviet Union raced to build as many nuclear weapons as possible. And eventually, the United States system and the economy could hold up to that stress of that arms race, and the Soviet Union battling, you know, 10 different other internal problems of stability collapsed under the weight of this arms race. My concern is that if we engage this technological arms race, it's never going to lead to an actual confrontation, but it's going to just create a system of stresses for both the United States and China. And one of the two systems is going to collapse from its own technological development first. And I fear that in the case of technologies like artificial intelligence and biological engineering, the Chinese system will be able to hold up to that stress much more efficiently than the United States system. Because, as you noted, the United States is fixated on these internal issues and these issues of freedom and these issues of racism, and not that we shouldn't be focused on these issues. I think that the Chinese system is much more willing to ignore those smaller issues for a perceived larger end game.
Yeah, I think what the Chinese are doing better than the Americans is that they're more united against the enemy compared to the U.S., which has so much infighting and disagreements amongst each other that they lose sight of what the real enemy is. While the enemy is fixated on destroying you, you're just concentrated on how to fix yourself. So of course you're gonna lose if that's gonna happen. So what I want people to understand is that people or the CCP, they're not afraid to pull the trigger. And once they have the technology, once they have the resources to take Hong Kong or take Taiwan or invade the South China Seas, they will do that. Like it's not a matter of like, oh well, ethically if they do that is wrong, or morally they can't do that. There's no discussions like this happening in China. Like once they have the resources, once they see America is weak and there's no defense in those areas, they will go to those areas and take over. It's not a matter of if or why or when. It is just they're gonna do it. If listen, this whole thing happening in America right now, the protests and instability, is making China so happy. I'll tell you that right now. Like China is like, oh my God. First of all, Trump's reelection chances have gotten weaker. So that's number one. That's the first thing. Second, there's so much instability that they're focused on themselves. They're trying to fix themselves while we expand. Like we don't have that problem. The only problem that we have is Hong Kong. And so far that's kind of under control, you know. I mean, they're passing these laws, there are cops everywhere, people are getting arrested. They're suppressing that issue hardcore. And with the attention on American protests, now there's no attention to Hong Kong. So this is a golden opportunity for CCP. And it's not if they will pull the trigger, it's just when. And if America weakens, this is their opportunity. So I'm urging America not to lose sight on the bigger issue here, which is the CCP. I mean, yes, you guys have a lot of issues too, but these are small issues in comparison to the global stage. This is chess. It's not checkers anymore. So yeah.
So I think that all makes sense, and I think that's all very important for us to keep in mind. What you were just saying about how the CCP feels about the George Floyd protests. I have a couple questions. The first is regarding one of the most controversial figures in the United States, and it's not Trump, it's Alex Jones. Who is
oh, I love that guy.
I think he's remarkably demonized by the media and by the fact that he is one of the only alleged fake news outlets that's completely banned from most social media platforms, if not all social media platforms. To me is really remarkable. And from all the different commentators and political pundits and talk shows in the United States, I don't think I've ever seen one that is so affirmative in saying that the Chinese Communist Party is the greatest enemy the United States has ever faced. Alex Jones is unequivocal about that. He makes no claim, he has no qualms saying that so many of our social issues are being pushed by the Chinese Communist Party because they want instability, and so many of our economic issues are being pushed by the Chinese Communist Party. So, you said you loved Alex Jones, and I want to know your thoughts on A, how the media has censored Alex Jones, and B, what you think. It seems like you think he's right in the claim that the CCP is the greatest enemy we've ever faced.
I think he's right on many things. He's also been wrong on many things. I listen to him every now and then to kind of see what his perspective is on certain things, especially the Hong Kong protests. I got to listen to him talk about that, and there are some stuff that was inaccurate, but I don't blame him. He's not here. Although he's had a team here. He's had his InfoWars team on the ground in Hong Kong last year, covering some of the protests. But from just the Hong Kong side alone, I would say he's 70% correct. So you have to know like which information to take in, which to kind of decipher as fake news. But I think his heart is in the right place. I don't think he's trying to cause fake news on purpose. When it comes to Alex Jones, he makes a lot of bold predictions. So of course, like there are some that's going to be correct and there's some going to be wrong. Like when it comes to like human chimeras and things like that, like I don't know if that's really happening. But when it comes to CCP, I think he's dead correct. I think he sees that there's a greater enemy in that the Chinese Communist Party wants Americans to be all dead. And I think the mainstream media censoring him is quite hilarious because the American mainstream media, it's famous for its biases. Like you go to CNN or Fox News and you get two completely different stories. Especially now with the George Floyd protests, like I I go on
Mm-hmm.
American media outlets and I see like two different sides. It's really quite interesting. So when that happens, I kind of go on Alex Jones and see kind of what his perspective is on the whole thing, just to kind of get some reference. I'm not buying his rhetoric or his views 100%, but I just want to see where his heart is at to judge for myself. But when somebody is censored that much, it means something. It means either one, he's telling the truth, or two, he's pissing off the establishment so much that they need to silence him. In China and Hong Kong, when people get silenced, that's when they're kind of doing the right thing. That's when the powers at play don't want you to absorb those information. So I think really it did him a great favor because now he has something to kind of go off about. Like, oh, the mainstream media has banned me. I'm the most banned person in America, which he is, and that's got to mean something. So, I mean, I think they banned him for to really silence him. But how can you really silence somebody in America? I don't think you can unless you kill him. I mean, you can have your own website. You can have you can even make your own Twitter if you wanted to. Make your own platform. In America, you can always do that. In China, it's a different story. So I applaud Alex Jones for his bravery and his nuttiness to spread the message. Even though he's so nutty, he's very entertaining. You can't really deny that, and that's part of his charm. Is to entertain you with these really sad news and end of the world news. So I haven't listened to him for a while, but I was going to for these George Floyd protests just to see what he's gonna say, but I can already kind of predict what what he's gonna say, just by knowing his views on most things. Uh, and I think he's very correct about what's happening in Hong Kong, and I think for the most part, what I see from American outlets, American news medias are largely accurate when it comes to Hong Kong protests. I see some far left news outlets saying that it was funded by CIA or you know stuff like that. And I can tell you that's complete fake news. But largely, I think there's a bipartisan effort and support for Hong Kong in America. So I think that's good. But I hope Americans don't forget about it, because now there's, George Floyd and everything else happening in the United States locally. I hope people can really look at things globally and see how these protests can influence world leaders and their decisions, because you would be fooling yourself if you didn't think that CCP is using this protest, the George Floyd protest now, to their advantage. Actually, just 10 minutes ago, it popped up on my notifications. Like Carrie Lam, our governor, our chief executive in Hong Kong, just gave a press conference saying, basically justifying Hong Kong police brutality by, oh, look at America, look at what they're doing there. I mean, that's basically what she said just now. So, uh, so I hope people can see through this, because every disaster comes an opportunity for somebody, and this is a great opportunity for CCP. I'm not trying to delegitimize the George Floyd protests at all. I mean, you guys are doing your own thing, but be smart about it. Be wary of what other people are going to do with your cause. Because there are a lot of evil characters out there that are going to profit from your suffering, monetary or not. So just be careful.
I think that's all. I completely agree, and I think I completely agree with your stance on Alex Jones. Definitely a sensationalist in a lot of ways, but I listened to him in preparation for this podcast, actually, because I knew that he'd have something interesting to say about China. And his stance on this George Floyd protest is that the Chinese Communist Party is directly funding protests so that they could destabilize things and keep Trump from getting reelected, and so that they could take the spotlight off of Hong Kong. So the next thing I want to ask about, and I think this is a good transition point. So I mentioned that I had gone to Beijing, and I had mentioned probably the thing that stood out to me the most was the absolute, there were police really everywhere. There were police in the hotel lobby.
And cameras too, right?
And cameras, right. Police and cameras. And I have a little hypothesis that, and for the record, I'm extremely sympathetic for the George Floyd protests, and I think that by and large the United States has a severe policing problem. I think that the police is too militarized. I think that much of our policing policy is a holdover from the civil rights era. I think that there's a very strong case and very strong evidence that our federal government passed drug legislations for the purpose of suppressing the civil rights movement, and then the CIA brought drugs into inner cities and middle America so that they could create a drug. There's the saying that in the case of drugs, the supply creates a demand. So I think there's a lot of real evidence that the CIA brought drugs into the United States so that working class and black neighborhoods would develop these drug trades, and that they could be essentially over-policed and occupied by the police. That being said, it seems like there are two very different kinds of police states in America versus China. It seems like, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, I can't imagine there being any crime existing in China. I'm sure there is some, but definitely not at the level of the United States. I think that there's just too much police presence for there to be crime. Whereas I think in the United States, police presence is existing to create a demand for crime. I think that the police and the government relies on crime so we can have our private prisons and so that corporations can be profiting off of prisoners. And also so that certain areas of the United States can stay impoverished and stay reliant on certain political parties.
Yeah, I largely agree with that. In China, I can't speak about China, mainland China, because my interactions in mainland China are quite limited as I try to spend least time there as possible. I think last time I went there was maybe 7, 8 years ago into Beijing, and but in Hong Kong, it never used to be like this, like the police state that we have now. In Hong Kong, the police used to be quite respected. They didn't really harass anybody. They they would do their job, and they wouldn't do their job with excessive force, and at least not in front of cameras. And nobody really had a hatred with the Hong Kong police until, say, last year of June until now. And now the police acts as a military force, and you would see riot police on an ordinary day like this. Like today, there's no protests. People are pretty peaceful outside. There's no movements, nothing going on. People are going to work, going to school. But you'll see riot police with riot gear just standing in subway stations, looking at people, checking people, searching your bag. And this would be all over the place, not just in sensitive areas, but residential areas, business districts, downtown. So now we have this police state, and the police state in Hong Kong is basically to ensure that nobody speaks and nobody acts up. Whereas I think in America, it's like what you were saying is that they're creating this business of police where they're arresting people and the jail gets profits, the police gets profits, and there's this whole ecosystem with drugs and police and jail and courts, and people are profiting off of crime. And I think in Hong Kong is not really like that at all. Whereas here it's like you obey my commands, and by I mean CCP or the governor of Hong Kong, or you bite the dust. So it's really like that. I mean, it's comparable to East Berlin or to Nazi Germany, where they want everybody in line and they want absolute obedience, and that's all they want. They don't want to arrest you if they don't have to. They don't want to beat you up if you don't have to. However, if you step out of line, they'll be the first ones to do that. So it's a really different type of brutality. In America, it's like somebody acts up and there's some excessive force and the world goes crazy. Here, it's like the excessive force is the baseline, and it's more of a thought police than anything, because their presence is making you know that you can't do certain things. Whereas in the States, it's not really like that. People are free to think what they want. You can say "fuck the police" in front of the police officer, and they won't do anything. But here, if you do that, oh man, you'll probably be dead. So it's a different type of suppression, and I don't want to say which one is worse than the other. They're both bad, but I don't think America's had anything like that. So I don't think Americans really understand what it feels like to have a thought police around. I mean, cops here, they can search your phone, they can search your bag without warrants. And if they find something on your phone, let's say they find a picture of Winnie the Pooh and Xi Jinping together, you'll probably get a beating, or you'll probably be arrested. And they don't have any grounds to arrest you, by the way. Like, it's not against the law to have Winnie the Pooh and Xi Jinping, but they can make up some excuse to take you to the station. And whatever they do to you at the station is behind closed doors and nobody knows. So that's the scary part. Nowadays, you don't have to be doing anything to be arrested. So, for example, last Wednesday, we had a national anthem law that was, I mean, there's so many laws being passed in Hong Kong these days. But anyways, we had a national anthem law that basically says that if you mock the national anthem, the Chinese national anthem, it's equivalent of burning the flag, right? So they were going to pass this law in Lechgo, and a lot of people showed up, around that district, that area, to protest this law. But since there were so many riot cops already there ahead of the protesters, nothing really happened. So, protesters couldn't really gather to make a force to do anything. So people just kind of walked around, and there was just a lot of riot cops around, searching people and detaining people and asking people, where are you going? And in their massive detainment, they detained, I think, about 300 people, 100 at a time. So there are about 3 spots where 100 people were detained. And one of the spots was around this office area that were next to the government buildings. And of those 100 people, I think only like 20 or 30 were actual young protesters that were going to, protest. And they never had weapons or nothing like that. They were just there to protest peacefully. And the other people were pretty much all bystanders and office workers that were out for lunch, and people that were around the neighborhood that lived there. And without question, they took everybody back to the station, and they released them maybe 24, 48 hours later. So now that's the tactic of Hong Kong police and the Hong Kong government and the CCP, is that it doesn't matter if they don't find dirt on you. It doesn't matter if you're not a protester. If you're in the area, you get taken to the station, and God knows what happens there. And these aren't, I mean, I want you to imagine this is just a regular day, like people getting lunch in their office hours. This isn't like downtown Atlanta or what's happening now, where things are getting broken, there are fires everywhere, cop cars are getting burned. That's not what's happening. This is a regular sunny day on a Wednesday. Massive people are getting detained and being questioned, having their phones checked, having their bags checked, and having their pictures taken. And this is what's happening in Hong Kong. It's the reality of what's happening now. So it's really 1984 on steroids, and this is what we have to deal with.
It really does seem like it's unimaginable to an American what this kind of a police state is. And I think you're right in saying that, you could go in and debate which one's worse, but they truly are 2 different kinds of police states. And it's very interesting to me, and it really is incredible how suppressed the Chinese people are. So, I've seen you say many times that the thing that Americans can do to best support the people of Hong Kong is to re-elect Trump. Do you have any amendments to that? Any additional comments? Any changes?
Not really. I think a lot of people get mad at me for for supporting Trump, or especially on my meme page, because a lot of people on the meme page are like liberals or people on the left in America, and they don't like Trump. I understand, but when it comes to my point of view, I mean, I'm a Hong Konger, and I look at what's beneficial to us, and not really what's happening in the domestic United States. Um, the reality is that Trump has been the most hawkish president towards China we have ever had in our recent times. I mean, you had Obama, which were pretty friendly to the Chinese. You had Bush, which didn't really do anything to the Chinese. And you had other politicians that were all pro-China, including Biden. Um, there's only been one person that has, you know, the balls to call out China for what it is. And Trump, to his credit, he has been very friendly towards China at certain times. Like he's not out there calling China's BS every single day. He tries to amend the relationship. I see it. Like he calls Xi his best friend and shit like that. But Trump, being a business guy, being a guy that knows how to negotiate, he gives China some leeway, some space where they can make concessions. So Trump doesn't back China into a corner and makes China make a move. I think that would be a mistake. But Trump gives enough room that China can have some kind of concession. And I think he was doing the right thing, but he was still calling out China's BS in the for American interests. You know, he wants to protect American interests, so he needs to deface the illusion of China. And what's happening now is that China realizes that Trump has been the most aggressive president towards them and is a danger towards them, because Trump and Xi Jinping together could mean bad things like war. And China will make their best effort to try to elect Joe Biden 100%. Because if Trump gets reelected next term, you will see a lot of money going out of China, like you're seeing now. You know, like Trump just announced sanctions on Hong Kong officials, and he's going to, he's basically going to pull the plug on Hong Kong with American businesses. And when American businesses pull out of Hong Kong, 100% other world businesses, international communities will do the same thing. So with Trump in office, China is losing a lot of money. China is losing this Hong Kong battle as well. And just in the public's point of view, in the world point of view, China is looking bad. You know, like they look horrible when Trump is in office, because Trump has kind of broken through the illusion of China being the good guy. And if America plays ball with China, China will become the good guy again. So 100%, if Trump gets reelected, China would not have a good time. Doesn't mean that they would go away. They would just have more of a challenge in terms of bribing other people and having their influences in American businesses. And Joe Biden really scares me because he's been very pro-China, even though he's been speaking up about with Hong Kong recently. But I think he's only doing that because that's kind of the general zeitgeist on Hong Kong. Not really because he really cares about Hong Kong, if you know what I mean. And I don't know if Trump really cares about Hong Kong, but I know Trump wants American interests. And to do that, to secure that, he needs to defeat China. So, so I guess freedom in Hong Kong could be a byproduct of securing American jobs from China.
So that all being said, and you're saying that China would will go to certain lengths to help Joe Biden get elected.
Yeah, for sure.
Just how far do you think the CCP would go to stop Trump?
They'll go as far as they want. Listen, I saw this clip of the protest happening outside the White House last night, and I heard people in Mandarin saying "Go, go, 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 let's go." I'm not sure how legit that clip is. I mean, that audio could be inserted afterwards, but it wouldn't surprise me at all. Because here's the thing. In Hong Kong, the protests in Hong Kong, Chinese rhetoric, Chinese propaganda has always been saying that our protest has been funded by Americans, and especially the CIA. So that's kind of the mindset that they have, is that protests are always funded by outside money and outside influences. But it's not always the case. I mean, of course, Americans have funded other protests around the world. That's that's not even debatable. But in Hong Kong, it's not true at all. And when they have this point of view, it means that they can also do the same with other countries. And who benefits the most from American instability? It's not Americans. It's Chinese, I mean, American instability is caused by, George Floyd, but Chinese people or CCP sees that as this golden opportunity to take down America. So they would do everything in their power to elect Joe Biden. And Joe Biden has a track record of working with China. So I think before there was this talk of Russian influence with President Trump, I think that's all an illusion. And I think the thing that you should be really scared of is Chinese influence in the next American election. Like 100%.
I think that last point is very true, and I think we are going to see that. And I'm very interested and concerned that technologies like deepfakes can be used by the CCP in this election. So
let me say something real quick. Chinese social media, they have these people working around the clock for like a penny a day or something like that to write comments on YouTube, Instagram, basically to influence people's opinions. If you go on any pro-democracy Instagram or YouTube in Hong Kong, you'll see out of 100 comments, you'll see maybe 70 comments are made by these, what we call mo, which means 50 cents, which means that they're paid to comment. They're paid to comment and to write shit comments about your movement. And they're all around, they work around the clock. There are, I don't know how many of them are there. There has to be, I don't know, a lot. And all they do is go on the Instagram, YouTube, and write comments. The professional social media commenters. And what they want to do is to create this false sense of illusion that the majority are against you. Let's say I post a picture of Hong Kong protests, and out of 100 comments, I see 70 that are saying, no, you're wrong. You guys are the ones that are rioters. You guys don't deserve freedom. So if somebody from the outside looks at that and they see that majority of the people that are commenting are against your cause, they might be swayed to the other side. You know what I mean? So that's the tactic that they're playing. They have numbers on their side. They can employ so much people to write these comments. And these aren't just Russian bots. These are actual people writing comments. And you would be a fool if you didn't think that they would do the same with American elections, American social media, except they would just write in English. Let's say I have a pro-Trump picture on my Instagram, they would go all out, calling Trump names or saying how good Joe Biden is, or why you should vote for Biden. So this is the propaganda campaign in the 2020 time that we're living in. It's not just like pictures and posters of, Mao Zedong or whatever. Now it's very interactive, and they're going on the attack. So these are some of the things that, or strategies that they're employing now to influence people, and not just people in Hong Kong and China, but in America, because now the battlefield is coming up in the election is in America. Like, they want to elect Joe Biden, and they'll do whatever they can, including these tactics, and you won't even know. You won't even know you're being played. So that's how good they are. So just be aware of these things happening.
I think that's all going to be a real big concern, and I'd be shocked. I'm completely confident that that's going to be happening in this election, but B, I don't think our media will cover that.
Yeah.
Unless
So for people that are wondering, you can look up Chinese 50-cent army.
50-cent army.
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, what you just said, I think, transitions very well to my second to last question. And that's about TikTok. To me, I find it very concerning that a company based in Beijing has so quickly taken over, the most popular social media in America. And what also concerns me is that ByteDance Mobile, I believe that's the name of the company that owns TikTok. They're first and foremost an artificial intelligence company, and I think it's very concerning that the CCP is potentially in control of this large-scale experiment, developing technologies that will A, take over the social media industry, and B, develop algorithms that stimulate users' limbic systems in such a way that they'll just keep scrolling through content and really optimizing how much content they'll look at in a given day. To me, I see this as something that can be so easily weaponized by a group like the Chinese Communist Party, or even weaponized by corporate interests in the United States that want people to believe in particularly lucrative social narratives, or turn people into particularly good consumers of certain items. So I suppose my question there is, what do you think the threat of a Beijing-owned social media company like TikTok, do you think that's a large threat to the United States and the rest of the world?
100%. Yeah, 100%. With Chinese social media, every data point goes back to Beijing. So, I mean, you think Facebook is scary, or you think Instagram is scary when it comes to its privacy, privacy issues, is nothing in comparison to Chinese media companies. We have Weibo, which is like the Chinese Twitter. We have WeChat, which is like the Chinese messenger system, like iMessage or WhatsApp. And everything that you say on those apps goes back to the database that Beijing has. And if you criticize Xi Jinping, if you criticize the CCP on those apps, trust me, the police will knock on your door the next day, if not the next hour. And they are really using these platforms to seek out any person that has any rebellious thoughts. And it's a form of thought policing in terms of we know that if we talk shit on those apps, we get, the ban hammer, and the ban hammer on life, not just ban on those apps. So we dare not to talk about it. So if we don't talk about it, then nobody even thinks about it. And they are using those, like TikTok, they're mining those data, and they're gonna use it against everybody at the end. And what I mean by that is that if you have, let's say you have a provocative video on TikTok, like they would save it on their database. And let's say you try to talk about China in the future, they would take that video back out and say, look at this guy. Like, you take this guy seriously? Like, he's like dancing like a fool. Just things like that, like dirty tricks like that. They will use it against anybody that they don't like. And I don't know about TikTok because I don't have TikTok, but if it enables location, it enables face detection, 100% they will use it to their best advantage. And you don't want Beijing knowing where you are. You don't want Beijing knowing what you look like. Trust me. So these are really, really serious privacy concerns, and they could use these data to wage war, basically. So it's super concerning. And even if TikTok is a private, quote unquote, private company in China, they could absorb it in one day. Like Alibaba was absorbed by the CCP in just they never asked any questions. Jack Ma was the CEO of Alibaba. CCP, they just said, hey, you're getting too powerful. We're taking over. And now Alibaba is owned by the CCP. And every Chinese corporation has a member of the CCP inside its shareholders. So people might say, oh, TikTok is a private company in China. No, they are being surveillanced and controlled by the CCP, especially China. China has the biggest database with social media in the world, more than the US. And that's one of their biggest weapons is data. And with TikTok infiltrating America like that, it really, really worries me, because now China has so much dirt on America, and America don't even know it. And I really have to emphasize the point that America has to wake up to the fact that CCP is in your homes now every fucking day, like Alexa is. Except Alexa is just selling the data to somebody else. They're not, I don't know if they're doing anything malicious with the data. Maybe they are. But CCP 100% will use that data for malicious activity. So just be real careful of what you do with these apps, because it's not good at all. And me personally, I don't have any Chinese apps on my phone. I don't have Weibo, I don't have WeChat, I don't have any of those things. Because listen, that app could turn on your microphone or your camera any fucking time they want and know your location. So if you're conspiring, quote unquote, against the CCP, they would have all the evidence to arrest you. And you might think, oh, I'm in America, they won't do that. I think you would be mistaken. I mean, now is not the time, but later on, when things heat up between the US and China, when they have your location, your face, your preferences, they can influence you just from the internet. They don't have to go to your home to kill you or to tell you to be quiet. They could influence you with these ads or propaganda or the 50 Cent Army and things like that. Or it doesn't have to be guns and bullets anymore. It's all, like Alex Jones says, it's an information war. So that's the most dangerous part, because it's not right in front of our faces. They're not sticking a gun in your face and be like, hey, do this or do that. You're being influenced without even knowing. So when it comes to Chinese companies, you can't trust any of them, any one of them, because they're all influenced, they're all controlled by CCP. It's not like in America you have good companies and bad companies. In China, they're all bad. So yeah.
Wow. Um, I think I think that covers all my questions. This was really concerning to listen to be honest, but it's important. This was all Everything you shared is very important for Americans to appreciate, and I'm very concerned that the average American doesn't really care or think about the CCP. So, I gotta thank you again for being brave enough to come on. If you have any closing remarks, just feel free to say them.
Yeah, so I hope people in America uh, won't stop paying attention to what's happening in Hong Kong, because it's not just about a Hong Kong problem. Hong Kong is basically the front line of confronting the CCP. And if Hong Kong falls, Taiwan is next. And Taiwan is gone, then South China Sea is next. And believe it or not, America is also on that short list. And like I said earlier, it doesn't have to be with military intervention when it comes to the Chinese invasion of America. It's all about information these days. Um, they could influence you on how you vote. They could influence you on your purchasing activities. They could influence you to support China, to to keep the voices of Hong Kong, Tibet silent. All these things come into play and have a relationship with each other. So I think now we are in a better place than a year ago when it comes to Hong Kong. At least people know about us. At least people know about this oppression, that's happening in Hong Kong and Tibet and other areas of China where our freedoms are being taken away. But I think knowing isn't enough. I think you have to, support us and just let other people know that you cannot support China anymore. A lot of people ask me about what they can do from the States or from Europe to support Hong Kong. And reality is there's not much you can do. You can't really fly here and protest and get arrested. But what you can do is boycott China. Stop supporting China. Don't buy Chinese made goods. Don't support Chinese companies. Stop using TikTok. Be more vocal about our cause here in Hong Kong. Because the Chinese Communist Party, what they're scared of the most is the information war against them. Because in China, they spend billions of dollars trying to have this propaganda campaign with their own people. And they also spend the same amount of money with Americans, where they try to whitewash Chinese companies and say that they're not that bad, or they stand in solidarity with American values, which they don't. It's all lies. So, I mean, you can see the same thing happening with the Chinese spokesperson on Twitter. I mean, she's a member of the CCP, and she tweeted, "I can't breathe." So it's like you see what's happening here. Chinese companies, CCP, they're all playing possum. They're all playing this like, oh, we stand with America, we stand for freedom, while behind your back they are beating up Hong Kong protesters. So you really have to ask yourself, like, what side do you stand on? Do you stand on the side of free society, free thought, free values, or do you stand on the side of suppression? And I understand that in America there are a lot of suppression as well, but I think it pales in comparison to the bigger demon that is CCP. Um, just for some context, a couple million Muslims are in concentration camps today in China for simply being Muslim. Uh, this kind of thing wouldn't happen in America. And if it did, would have even bigger protests than George Floyd, because these are things that are inhumane. It's not just isolated incidents. These are re-education camps where they have to be brainwashed to hate Islam in those camps. If not, they're killed. And they're being forced to take a no medicine, and they're being lab rats to a lot of Chinese medical services. And God knows what else happens in those camps. And these things are happening today. They're not just history. They're not like Jewish concentration camps where it's the thing of the past. These things are now. So why aren't people talking about it? Why can't people support it? Why can't we all raise awareness to these things? Because it's so far away. To the average American, is too far-fetched. It's like, oh, I don't even know these people. It's China. They have a whole different government. But it all relates back to you, because China is now in the United States. They're influencing American politics. They're influencing American money, financial systems, schools, technology. So the more they're in America, the more power they get, and the more suppression that they will have on their own people and their own country. And just like the NBA, you see people being suppressed. I mean, like Daryl Morey was talking about Hong Kong, the GM of the Houston Rockets, and he was almost going to get fired just for supporting Hong Kong because of the pressure of CCP, because of the money that CCP has infiltrated in the NBA. So it's not just about things that are happening in China, but America as well, because they've infiltrated America already. It's just that you don't know, and they didn't do it with boots and bullets on the ground. So, what you can do from your point of view as an American is to, number one, stop buying Chinese, stop supporting Chinese businesses, stop supporting businesses that support China, even if they're American. And number two is keep talking about Hong Kong, keep talking about our struggles here, because the struggle is getting worse and worse. Even though I think our protest has been largely successful, because the world now knows about Hong Kong, and the international community is really worried about Hong Kong. And that's one of our goals. It's not our demand, but that's one of our goals, is to push our suffering into the international front so that people across the world can help us, especially the United States. But what the average American can do is just to raise awareness about what's happening here. Because if you think, again, I don't want to compare it's apples and oranges. If you think what's happening in America is bad, over here it is much, much worse. And I just want people to understand that we are people too, and we are freedom-loving people, and we are people not very different than the average American. We have the same values. We love freedom. We just want happiness, and that's been taken away from us, minute by minute, and things are moving really, really rapidly here. Our freedoms are getting eroded day by day. So please help us. Please support us any way you can. And please boycott China.
Thank you very much. This was another episode of Logos Soup. This featured Psychedelic Milk. Thank you, Psychedelic Milk, for being on the show, and thank you for listening.